Hello everyone, Jester Bell is here, and today I wanted to circle back and talk about the sensation of romance disappearing in modern movies and where it might be coming from. And I want to just show you a very quick comparison of how the dynamics of Hollywood doing romance and promoting things of that nature in movies have changed by this quick poster comparison from the recent movie Tron Ares. You see the poster for the first Tron, back in the 80s, has the male lead standing front and center and the female character standing close next to him. Now, Tron Legacy, released in 2010, has the male character standing front and center and the female lead standing a bit suggestively and beside him. Then for Tron Ares, they did that exact same poster with Jared Leto in the movie with Jeff Bridges standing 3 feet aside from him. Gay. So I saw that poster comparison going around online because they're all the exact same concept, just done differently, reflecting the time period they've been made in, to note just the lack of any sort of sensuality and romance in movies in general, and how our romantic tropes have gone away. And I've, of course, talked about this before, how so many traditional tropes have disappeared and they just don't do romance anymore, and they've avoided things in certain movies, just actively avoided, like times when a romantic story was pitched or there was supposed to be a kiss scene, just avoiding that kind of thing altogether. And so I want to talk about the source of that and why that has happened in Hollywood and why it greatly matters. So I think it's pretty safe to say that it was the Me Too movement that ruined romance in Hollywood. If anything was perhaps leading into it beforehand, the Me Too movement is what completely changed it throughout all of Hollywood. And I'm going to tell you why in this video, the various reasons that the Me Too movement is what ruined romance in Hollywood. And they might be saying a lot of things behind the scenes, like to sort of deny this, saying that they're just giving the audience what they want, and that young people these days don't like romance. I think people are very much confused about romance these days, and I don't think that Hollywood is helping. But I do not believe that Hollywood is making these decisions about romance in movies because of any type of external data. I think it's coming from the inside. Now, once again, let's get into it. So here is the first way that the Me Too movement seriously changed romance in the depiction of it in Hollywood. The rise of intimacy coordinators. For those who don't know, Hollywood did not have a healthy relationship with how they depicted romance in movies in the past either. And during the Me Too movement, it was finally time where a lot of actresses spoke up about the boundaries that were being crossed in, let's say, some of the more explicit scenes. But Hollywood's way of addressing this, in my opinion, was absurd. Their idea of how to address these boundary-crossing scenes was to hire a third party into it to help coordinate these scenes. From what I've heard behind the scenes, these new coordinators, this new role that you could be employed into in Hollywood, has extended to even something as simple as just a kiss scene. This has created a whole nother hassle to depicting romance in movies, where oftentimes these productions don't want to have to hire this person. So instead of actually addressing the problem and coming up with a healthy way to approach romance in movies, it's part of the reasons why they've just abandoned doing romance altogether. But of course, there are many other reasons why romance just straight up disappeared in movies after the Me Too movement. Hollywood and the people behind the scenes seem to have a very hard time grasping what is healthy romance and not being able to tell the difference between that and predatory behavior. And we see how that has created restrictions in even the most basic plot lines, like Little Mermaid is inherently a romantic plot. They were going to do that movie regardless of it being a romance or not because they're also trying to capitalize on nostalgia bait. But we notice in the movie how lyrics from Kiss the Girl and other sorts of things like Poor Unfortunate Souls had to take away any sort of mention of, body language from the original movie, or Kiss the Girl had to make sure that it sounded very much consensual so there weren't any lines crossed.
Possible she wants you to, there is one way to ask her.
Possible she wants you to use your words, boy, and ask her.
It don't take a word, not a single word.
If the time is right, then the time is tonight. Go on and kiss the girl.
So it's like Hollywood has been petrified and paralyzed because the people behind the scenes making these rules don't seem to have a good understanding themselves about like what is the difference between a predatory relationship and a healthy romantic relationship and the boundaries there. They don't understand that. There was nothing wrong with the original Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid wanted Eric to give her a kiss, and the song was about encouraging him to do that and show his feelings. There was nothing predatory about it, but still, these changes had to be made, and it's because of the post-MeToo movement and those ideas making a new hesitance and a fear around the idea of romance and not being able to tell the difference between healthy romance and, negative behavior. And so they've blurred that line so that now what most people would see as regular romantic healthy behavior is now seen as predatory, so they have to change that and put all of these restrictions and changes around that. And I think that is another reason why romance in general has disappeared from Hollywood, because now, in addition to intimacy coordinators, now the language and the behavior of romance and romantic couples also has to be more restricted and, tiptoed around and all of that, because there's people behind the scenes who have made it sound like it is predatory. And so who wants to deal with that? And talk about taking all the fun out of romance and romantic dynamics and chemistry, because now you have to tiptoe over all these rules and what is going to offend someone and what is going to cross a line. And this leads into how men must be portrayed in movies and also the removal of romantic tropes, because as everyone from Hollywood is terrified after the Me Too movement and there's all these influences around it, there is also a terror of how men have to be portrayed, because there's this idea out there that men have this inherently predatory behavior, like that has been pushed by certain people, and that men taking the lead or being more primal in relationships, that is bad, men being forward. Like, I remember Henry Cavill saying that he doesn't mind chasing women, and he wasn't saying it in a predatory way. He meant pursuing women, and he actually got zapped for saying that by people who were taking it literally, saying that Henry Cavill was expressing predatory behavior or something. So all of that the kind of masculinity that you used to see in romances has to be taken away, because there's people in Hollywood now that see it all as predatory and that kind of behavior from men as wrong. You cannot have the man pursuing the woman or taking the lead, or even, as I saw someone point out online, you can't even have men initiating kisses anymore. Yeah, I got someone writing to me once who allegedly worked in Hollywood who said that now when you do a kiss scene, you have to write around it to make sure that it's the woman who initiates the kiss. And after I saw that, I couldn't unsee it, that's the way movies are now. You can't have the man initiate a kiss or passionately pursue a woman in a masculine kind of way. You can't have that anymore, because all of that has been deemed predatory from men again. And I would say skewed as to say that it's inherently a predatory thing. But the problem with that is, I would say, having a man passionately pursue a woman, that's what a lot of women want to see in these movies. But you've taken away so many tropes for romance and so many different kinds of male figures that you can portray with that. You can't have the man who is passionately pursuing the woman. You can't have the man initiate the kiss. Like in other cases, you can't have the bad boy. Like that's been eliminated too. You can't have the bad boy with a heart of gold who's a bit rebellious. We've seen that removed because that was deemed as a toxic trope. That's not what women want to see today. So they said, even though I would say, and I'll get into this at the end, that is not true. But you've got all of these portrayals of men that can't be portrayed anymore in movies, and you've got all these portrayals of men in romances that can no longer be portrayed because they have been deemed predatory. And so all of that has been eliminated, so that there are so many kinds of romantic relationships that we can't even see anymore. Now, the problem here is, like, with masculinity removed in movies, that also removes a lot of the appeal of traditional romances that we used to see in movies. There's no longer any sort of masculine figure that you can see as the heartthrob or anything like that, because all of that has been removed. Romance also means that there might be a bit of vulnerability, maybe on both characters' parts at times, but also that has been removed because it inherently goes against what they're trying to push. Masculine men in romances are gone, and women cannot be vulnerable, certainly not. They don't want to have this. They subdue male characters all the time, time, which is not something that women actually like to see, and they can't allow women to be vulnerable at any time, which might be required when you're having a romantic relationship between two people. That's all seen as toxic, so that has had to be removed. And that is why, or one of the big reasons why we've seen romance disappear from movies so much. That also takes away a lot of romantic tropes. Like, you used to typically have a love interest in every single movie. You used to typically have a romantic subplot in every single movie, but now that in and of itself, I guarantee, is seen as misogyny and sexism. How dare you put the female character in the role of love interest too much? Or how dare you give the female character a male love interest, because women liking men is seen as making her weaker. Women aren't supposed to like men. That's not you being independent. That's not you being the perfect woman. So all of that has to be removed, so we don't get romance or even most basic romantic tropes anymore. But the interesting thing about all of this is what we're seeing the disappearance of is traditional romance after the Me Too movement, because they've completely skewed and blurred the very idea of healthy romance. They don't have any idea of what healthy romance looks like. They think that men being men is a toxic thing, and they don't want women to be any other trope other than the girl boss trope. They don't want women to be vulnerable in any way, even if they're not actually being vulnerable. Of any sort of perception, like being in love, they see as vulnerability, so they can't do that. But the interesting thing about all of this is, as we're seeing less and less romances from Hollywood, we're still seeing toxic romances, and that's what's really odd to me, because like, for all of the removal of traditional enjoyable romances that everyone could like, there's still things like 365 Days out there, and Margot Robbie's upcoming Wuthering Heights, and all of these, fetishized romances. Not really romances, but these shows and movies unironically fetishizing abuse. And we even see an odd amount of that. Like, I've talked about how sensuality has very much been removed from marketing, but the odd thing is like, Netflix recently was doing this show on Ed Gein, one of the most prolific serial killers of all time, but they hired a very attractive man to play him, and apparently they added this thing in the show where the women who he meets are fawning over him, and that is not reality what happened with this guy. But apparently, I guess why they did it is because true crime shows are mostly watched by women, so they wanted to lean into that and lean into that appeal. So it's bizarre to me that as we're moving away from traditional romance and healthy romance, we're still indulging in like these weird abusive and manipulative fetish fantasies for women to watch, so that we get rid of all the traditional stuff because we say it's toxic and it's wrong, but then we actually indulge in the actual obvious toxic stuff. It's so messed up. And I will tell you why I believe that they've been able to get away with this. Oftentimes, they try to justify these very perverse shows and movies made for women by saying, well, this is just women exploring themselves. This is just them exploring their sexuality by watching these perverse shows and movies. And that's how they try to work around it and say that this is actually empowering for women and it's okay for them to watch and enjoy and indulge in this stuff. Now, I think the actual reason it's happening is because the people behind the scenes, as they're trying to preach about romance and, changing men in masculinity and their roles and the toxicity and predatory nature of men, I don't think they have any actual idea of what healthy romance looks like. I think that they are completely warped in the head and skewed, and that's how you get, or at least partially how you get, the removal of traditional romance and romantic tropes in movies, but this perverse stuff still exists. They have absolutely no idea about what real healthy romance looks like, and they just go off and indulge in all of this nasty stuff and still pretend like they are the enlightened ones, which is to say that these Hollywood types should not be the ones preaching about what healthy romances look like in media, and if romance is healthy or not, or what positive masculinity looks like or not, if at all. Now, the argument here is going to be that, no, this is the audience. Weren't there studies that said that young people don't want to see romance in movies anymore? I think that those studies were completely skewed, because as I perceive everyone else, I don't think that the audience has actually changed much as Hollywood would like you to believe, because it's always been a thing in media that the romantic subplot tends to sell. You might have a small group of people who get annoyed with it, but the reason why it's done so much in the past is because it consistently sold. And now we're seeing movies sell less and less with the removal of romantic tropes, actually. And obviously that isn't the only reason, but it is part of one of the many, many things, the many, many elements that are traditional and relatable that Hollywood would consistently put in their movies that has been removed. And we're seeing movies do worse and worse. And I think that that is a small part of the reason. They're not allowing the traditional tropes that sell to people to actually be in those movies. So what I'm saying here is, it's not us, it's them. It's the people behind the scenes in Hollywood that have such a skewed idea of romance and what romance should be, if it's even good at all, that put out all this garbage for people where good romance is removed that everyone can enjoy and the perverse stuff remains. And I think that by and large, people are actually very turned off by it. And there actually needs to be a return to traditional romance in movies because it will sell movies again. And you can use movies to present positive ideas of romance rather than confuse people and make people feel anxious about it or walking on eggshells or just feel like it shouldn't even be pursued at all, as these movies promote. But all of this would require things like bringing masculinity back into movies and allowing to admit that it's okay for people to be vulnerable in relationships at times, and all of that. And all of that goes against the fundamental framework that the METOO movement changed, as you see in Hollywood, where they've decided that men and women cannot be in those roles anymore. It would really be immensely helpful if healthy traditional romance would appear in movies that actually reflected reality, and that would actually help the movies to sell as it's supposed to appeal to people, because of reproduction. That's why people are supposed to be drawn to this kind of stuff. And now they're just sort of denying human nature again and again and making movies more sterile as if that's going to sell to people. And it really just turns people off and I think makes people more miserable and not want to watch any of this stuff. So yeah, the Me Too movement did ruin romance in Hollywood, and it would be important to bring it back. In fact, I would argue it's such a core part of movies and selling movies. They will never get better unless romance actually comes back. But you need people with an actual basic and healthy idea of romance to begin with, and not whatever is going on with the people in Hollywood behind the scenes right now. But that is all I got for you guys today. What did you think of this video? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you, patrons and members, as always, for watching this video. If you want to support my channel, please consider becoming a member or patron. And I will see you guys next time.